Now. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, Restoring a Watershed Top to Bottom. My name is Catherine Wright, and I'm a park ranger for San Mateo County Parks. And we're so fortunate to have Kellyx Nelson, the Executive Director of San Mateo Resource Conservation District, as our presenter for this evening. In this webinar, Kellyx will take us on a virtual tour, dropping in to visit restoration projects from the Redwoods to the sea, through forests and creeks, across public and private lands, on farms and parklands, and it takes a village to restore a watershed. Before we get started, I'd like to say a short land acknowledgement statement. San Mateo County Parks acknowledges that our lands are located on the ancestral homeland of the Ohlone peoples, and that as the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with nature for millennia. Indigenous communities have lived in and moved through this place over hundreds of generations, and Indigenous peoples from many nations live and work in this region today. Please join us in acknowledging and honoring their ancestors, their elders, and their communities. Before we get to the main presentation, I'd like to go over some quick information about the format of this webinar. As an attendee, we cannot see your video or hear you, but if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A feature and we'll go over the questions towards the end of the presentation. We will also be recording this session and posting to YouTube afterwards if you want to watch later, or if you have people who are interested in viewing the presentation and they couldn't make it right now. So first, a little bit about our presenter today, and then I'll let her take away the presentation. Kellyx Nelson is passionate about public service and building strong alliances to tackle thorny challenges. She has spent over 30 years in nonprofits, government, and the private sector, developing, implementing, and assessing programs and partnerships for environmental benefit and other public good. She has served as the Executive Director of the Resource Conservation District since 2006. Her diverse career has included 14 years as an environmental educator for underserved communities in New York and San Francisco, driving a Freightliner cross-country as a long-haul trucker, delivering packages as a motorcycle messenger, and managing conservation projects for a local land trust. She has an undergraduate degree from Columbia University in political science and environmental science, and a master's degree in public policy from UC Berkeley. Under her direction, the Resource Conservation District has achieved distinction, receiving the 2017 Silicon Valley Water Conservation Award, 2016 Sustainability Award from Sustainable San Mateo County, 2012 District of the Year from the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts, and more. In 2015, Kellyx was inducted into the San Mateo County Women's Hall of Fame in recognition of her contributions to the overall well-being of the county. Kellyx and the San Mateo Resource Conservation District have been amazing partners to San Mateo County Parks with numerous projects over the decades, and some of these projects will be discussed in the following presentation. So without further ado, here's Kellyx.
Thank you. Thanks for such a kind introduction, and thank you for the land acknowledgement as well. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry that we can't be together. Usually if I would give this tour, we'd actually be on a tour together, going through the watershed, and some of you who are participants would probably be some of our hosts. So I'm glad you're here, and next time we'll do it in the real world. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. And so, yes, today's talk is about how it takes a watershed, restoration and stewardship from the Redwoods to the sea. Obviously, I'm riffing on it takes a village, and I'm going to explain to you why I think it takes a watershed. A little bit of housekeeping first, just a sense of what we're going to be doing. I've got some PowerPoint slides, then a little Google Earth tour, and then we'll have some time for Q&A for those of you who are interested. Unfortunately, there's no chat box, so though if we were together, we could be chatting about whatever came up. You can ask questions that we'll try to get to at the end. And as Catherine mentioned, this will be recorded. And I wanted to ask you all right now on your device, preferably on a phone, to go to this Poll Everywhere site, pollev.com/DevonLandry503. You can do it on your computer, but then you won't be able to see this screen. So if you can do it on your phone instead, that would be ideal. And if everybody can just go to that right now, enter that. I'm going to ask you just to get a sense of who's here. We'd love to know where you're coming from today. If we met up, we'd be chatting about where we came from. I'm wondering if everybody is, oh, somebody's in the middle of the ocean. I'm wondering if folks are, you know, all from the watershed, or if there are folks from other places. Looks like quite a few on the peninsula. So that'll be a lot of people who know the places that I'm referencing. A little further south as well. Okay, great. Thank you. And then the next thing that I want to ask you, oh, wait, there's a little bit more coming in now. A little bit inland there. Okay, got it. Thank you. So next thing I want to ask you is, I'm interested in knowing who's here with us. Are you, and you should click all of the things that are true for you. Are you somebody who's a curious local person? Are you an environmental professional? Are you a student? Are you a member of the RCD fan club? If there were one, feel free to start one. Or something else, anything else. Just kind of a sense of who's with us today. So I know how to tailor this a little bit. All right. Well, I am a little concerned that more of you environmental professionals aren't in the RCD fan club, but I'm glad to see that we've got, oh, it's inching up there. So good to see who's with us today. It sounds like there's a lot of people who either really know the things locally that I'll be talking about or know the issues or topics that I'll be talking about. And for whoever is the student, I hope that you might follow up with us afterwards and maybe be an intern for us or learn more. So a little bit about the RCD, or Resource Conservation District. RCDs are arguably probably the best form of government that you've never heard of. There's about 100 RCDs in California, thousands more nationwide, in almost every county in the nation. And we are a very specialized form of local government that was formed by people to help them. You know that joke, we're the government, we're here to help. We actually are here to help. And we provide boots on the ground assistance that is non-regulatory and free. And we've existed in San Mateo County, which was the first conservation district in the state of California, since 1939. And we exist in partnership with our pals at the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are actually formed to fit together. And I love that old-timey photo in Half Moon Bay from our original office back when we were called the Soil Conservation District, because, no pun intended, our roots go back to soil conservation. So what we are is we're a local government that is here to help people help the land. We work where we are invited, which is an unusual form of government, and we have extremely diverse tools to accomplish conservation. And the way that we do it is basically responding to what our community and stakeholder and partner priorities and needs are. So we're very nimble. One distinguishing feature is that we literally always work in partnership. Since we were formed, we work where we're invited, we work with others, we work on others' priorities, we take guidance from those, we respect their values, and literally everything we do is in partnership with others. So when I talk about we throughout this presentation, I'm meaning all of the others with whom we've partnered as well. In San Mateo, and if you're affiliated with other counties, I strongly encourage you to check out your conservation districts and conservation partners there as well. In San Mateo County, our RCD's focus priority program areas have to do with water resources, that's water quality and water availability, climate change, that's both building resilience to, adapting to climate change, and mitigating and reversing climate change. Wildlife, trying to help populations of threatened and endangered species recover from the brink of extinction. We are rooted in an abiding respect for agriculture. We were formed by farmers and we serve a lot of farmers. And we provide services having to do with forest health and fire resilience. So that's enough about us. Now I'm going to show you this great video that I think helps, oops, there, let me turn the sound off, that's by NASA, that is not local, obviously, but I like how this shows what a watershed is. Wherever you live on this earth, wherever you visit, wherever you work or recreate, you're in a watershed. And a watershed is a drainage basin. There are drainage basins within drainage basins. A watershed might be the area around a pond that drains into a pond, and that pond might spill into a creek, and the creek might spill into a river, and each of those are watersheds within the watersheds. And so on. Anywhere you are on Earth, you're in a watershed. And that is true for South America, all of Europe, anywhere you are. I think this is also kind of noteworthy because if you look at this map of South America, you can see large areas of landmass, kind of like the one above that showed the Mississippi River drainage basin, which is 40% of the geography, I think, of the United States. You know, in these, you'll see large areas that share common drainage, but note that often on the coasts, particularly when there's a spine that's mountainous, there's all these small watersheds that go off directly into the sea. And that is, when we zoom into the United States, you see that as well. There's this large drainage. And then what in California is a large drainage relative to our state of the Central Valley and the runoff from the Sierra Nevada that comes down into San Francisco Bay and out to the ocean. Nonetheless, we also have a spine in California with a number of smaller watersheds. So zooming in to San Mateo County, here's this spine of the Santa Cruz mountain range that goes through San Mateo County. And you see how it creates essentially a watershed divide. Oops, the spine's actually right here. You see how it creates a watershed divide with water that goes east into the bay and then out to the ocean and west directly into the ocean. And then we are going to focus in on a very special watershed today, which is the Pescadero Watershed or Pescadero Butte. And part of the reason that I say that it's special is because this is the most significant outer coast estuary. And estuary is where the freshwater and the saltwater meet and mix. This is the most significant outer coast estuary between Elkhorn Slough to the south and Tomales Bay to the north. It is a potential host to an independent population of critically endangered Central Coast coho salmon. It plays a very significant role in agriculture in San Mateo County. It's a mecca for tourism, and it's beautiful. And it's got a strong community, a lot of people in this community who I love. I do not live in this watershed, but I feel like it's a second home for me. So for folks who live in places like Pescadero and on the coast, these coastal watersheds and these coastal communities have a very deep and very immediate connection to the ocean and to marine ecosystems. It's evident to folks who live here and work here. And so part of what that means is that there's a really direct impact of some of our watershed choices, beneficial or negative, on marine resources. So it's not just these lands that we're affecting, but things downstream as well. So people who come here, people who live here, people who work here, people who come here love our forests. People come here to hike, bike, camp. People love the fisheries potential here. There's a tremendous investment in trying to recover populations of coho salmon and steelhead trout and others. The beautiful San Francisco garter snake, which is endemic to this area, found nowhere else in the world besides not this watershed, but this smaller region. Its prey, the California red-legged frog, our friend in the upper right there. All of these protected special status species live in the Pescadero watershed. They're abundant there, actually. We love our farms and agricultural resources in this watershed. We love what they produce. We depend on this as part of our food shed, our local food supply. and we love the people who produce them, who live and work and contribute to this community and are part of the watershed. Upper watersheds, before it gets these flat parts, the upper watersheds, including headwaters and even in the stream valleys, provide essential habitat for many species, but moreover, they provide complex ecosystem services that help upstream and downstream communities be resilient. When functioning well, these can attenuate both flooding and drought. They can protect you from flooding and protect you from drought to some extent. They minimize the risk of catastrophic erosion when they're functioning well. They protect water resources for people who depend on the water and animals who depend on the water, and they can contribute meaningfully to local economies. And the converse is also true. When impaired, these lands contribute to localized flooding. They make us vulnerable to drought. They accelerate erosion, and the water can be very compromised or non-existent. So, for example, see the circle on the upper left here just kind of gives you a sense of scale. This gully, which some of us called the Grand Canyon of Cloverdale Road, opened up in one storm event. The banks of this creek were very incised. They're cut steeply down because of changes in the creek and how the water flows, the hydrology over time. Soils were compromised, vegetation had been changed, roads, infrastructure have changed the way water drains. So maybe it wasn't sheet flow, but concentrated flow. And something like this can happen and does happen in large storm events. This isn't just a problem if it takes out the bridge that was very nearby, or the road, or if this is your property or your house was on it, but also, look at this beautiful area here. You can look at this and be like, this is gorgeous. People will come far and wide to see this, and it is beautiful. But that entire watershed was draining into that little creek. And when there's huge erosion and sedimentation like that, it piles up in that creek. And you can see that the road, the primary or only really reasonable road in and out of the town of Pescadero, is over a creek that was filled with sediment. The town has experienced chronic flooding. And whereas typically flooding is associated with too much water, in this case, flooding happened in minor storm events because the flooding wasn't about too much water. The flooding was about too much sediment in the wrong place. And when that sediment basically filled up that creek, the creek ceased to exist and the water needed another place to go. You can see some equipment in the creek there, and that's the beginning of a project that I'll talk about in a little bit. But some of those impacts of flooding were the farm field that was taken out of production, loss of income, loss of part of our food supply, people being cut off from emergency response, it itself being a risk, impacts to properties. Also, when that water couldn't go through a creek, it would slowly seep across oxygen deprived soils in the marsh, so that at times fish became stranded in oxygen depleted water, and we had annual die-offs of protected species of fish that were waiting to migrate out into the ocean. That was from one creek. This is from another creek. This is from Butano Creek. This is from Pescadero Creek, and both those creeks meet in the marsh. So you can see how when we talk about solutions to environmental issues, it's not just about the critters, it's also about the people, because watersheds are literally and figuratively what connect us all. Other issues that have to do with forest health is fuel load. When not managed well, our forests can have catastrophic fuel loads. They can have catastrophic wildfire, either because because there isn't appropriate access or egress for firefighting or for residents, or because the fuel load is too hot that increases the likelihood of a fire, or how intense a fire can be, or how controllable a fire can be. And then when you go all the way down to the mouth of the watershed, this is that lagoon, the estuary system again. Right here, this one little spot is where those fish complete their ancestral, mysterious, magical, extraordinary migration. And I would argue that the vast majority of the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who drive the Pacific Coast Highway every day don't know that right below them might be some animals completing this journey. So that's what happens when, I should say, let me go back and say that the way that we constrain these systems with our built human infrastructure, which we need, can have impacts on whether or not the mouth of this system opens and closes. When you look at the amount of sediment in there, when you look at whether or not there's enough water in coming down these streams with climate change or us humans taking a lot of water out, when you look at how the system is constrained because of the built environment, when you look at what happens with water quality when it does open up and that water rushes off where the fish are left, all of these together can make for a pretty significantly impaired system, as beautiful as it looks. So our goals for the watershed are aspirational. Endangered species populations are going to recover and thrive. Agriculture is going to be locally viable and it will thrive. The limited local water supply will meet the needs of farms, fish, and people who depend upon it. And the human and natural community will be resilient to the impacts of climate change, and agriculture will be part of the solution to climate change. These are our aspirations. But the work that we do in the watershed is to address specific issues towards those aspirations. This is pretty wonky. I'm not going to get into all of it. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all these slides. But I'm going to touch on these issues. Water supply is limited and local. There's no water utility. There's no snowpack. There's no state water project. There's no irrigation district. Everybody is dependent on the same local water supply. It's kind of the Wild West. So there's a lot of need for water conservation and water management that balances these competing demands on a limited and temporal supply of water. Excessive erosion and sedimentation causes loss of property, loss of topsoil that's needed for agricultural operations, that impairs fish habitat. Some of these sediments can smother the eggs of frogs and fish, and it can cause flooding downstream where those sediments accumulate. So we need to reduce the sources. We need to build soil health to prevent erosion. We need to reconnect creeks to their floodplain so that water can spill over and drop out sediment. And we did need to remove sediment where it had filled a creek. Another issue is that globally, the release of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases have accelerated climate change. This community is going to be seeing sea level rise, probably already is, and so are others on the coast. We need to build resilience to adapt to that. We need to reduce emissions, and we also are working to reverse climate change by drawing greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and storing them in the soils and vegetation from which they came. We also had aspirations around agricultural viability. There are high operational costs, labor and housing shortages, competition, regulatory complexity, drought, and flooding. So what we can offer to that is improving productivity, water security, reducing those costs, assisting with regulatory compliance, and improving their resilience to extreme weather. And those are a lot of the local jobs, which matters. I think sometimes folks see farms as some bucolic, sort of Norman Rockwellian sweet thing, and we forget that this is a business and people depend on it and local economies depend upon it, in addition to our food security. Steelhead trout, coho salmon face threats of extinction. San Francisco garter snake faces threats of extinction, and so do many others. And so there are a number of things that we are doing to try to address that, with removing dams and creeks, getting water back into creeks, and restoring habitat features high and low throughout the watershed. When I say we, who do I mean? The RCD works with all of these folks and many others. There's a few, I'm looking at this, and there's already a few whose logos aren't on here. And of course, the myriad almost limitless private landowners and land managers and farmers and ranchers and residents who don't carry logos, but are doing this work every day, living in this watershed and contributing to this watershed, are really heroes. And I also want to just acknowledge the stewardship that went on in this watershed in this region for many thousands of years before the relatively recent and accelerated impacts from humans, so that we're now working to reverse. And the impacts of these watersheds are largely within the last couple hundred years, which is very recent in human history. So I appreciate that we started this with a land acknowledgement about the people who were here and as Indigenous folks. And I just want to acknowledge that they're also not on this slide. So what are we doing about it? We're doing a lot of projects to build forest health and resilience. The circles on the right show a couple of projects that we've partnered with the Resource Conservation District of Santa Cruz County. We recognize that fire and migrating animals don't know county boundaries or property lines or what have you. And if they're terrestrial animals, they cross watersheds as well. So we're working on a number of projects with a number of partners, including county parks and state parks and Girl Scouts of Northern California and many others, to reduce fuel load in these forests, to remove invasive species of vegetation, to remove diseased, dead, dying vegetation, to create breaks for access and egress, and also to do some things that mimic in nature. Nature isn't protected. Natural nature doesn't have a fence around it. There are impacts that happen. Fire happens, and there are animals that graze, etc. And so we're also doing some things that mimic some of those impacts from nature to help these forests thrive as they were adapted to thrive. Remember the gully on Cloverdale Road, the Grand Canyon of Cloverdale? So this is what it looked like after we worked with partners to repair that. This is an example of what happens in a watershed. The landowner, Peninsula Open Space Trust, experienced the impacts. One of the probable sources had to do with infrastructure that was county owned and managed. Between the land trust, the county, and the RCD, we were able to work across interests to do what was right to make the creek healthier, to help the landowner protect their property value, and to help make sure that the road is safe and the bridge nearby. Oh, you know, I want to go back to this for a second and say that in general, the sediment management is a big part of watershed health. So you want to build soil health so that it's less likely to erode, prevent erosion with road repairs and culvert repairs, and catching gullies before they start, and building up your soil health, and then managing erosion when it does happen early and often, and then giving sediment places to go, so that and letting sediment, having sediment erode and sort through the system is a natural process as well. We've accelerated it, but there's a fair bit of that that's natural. I did mention that dredging project to reestablish a creek. Butano Creek had been completely filled with sediment and was essentially impassable by fish. So by dredging this creek, we were able to put the creek back in its historic channel and give the fish access to an entire watershed from which they had been cut off, while also easing the flooding of the road. Furthermore, we were able to remove that sediment and then beneficially reuse that sediment in some of the lower areas of the marsh where water had been collecting and seeping through, stripping it of its oxygen, which caused the suffocation of the fish that I mentioned earlier. And there's the road that we looked at before. And I also mentioned needing to give sediment someplace to go. We often talk about floodplain restoration, and when we do, at one point I realized that when I was saying floodplain restoration, a lot of people thought I meant stop flooding of their properties. Floodplain restoration is actually the opposite. It's finding places on our land that can flood, because historically creeks would weave and manage and change their course and correct themselves. So when they did that, it would slow water down so the water didn't cut through as hard. And it would give, the water would slow down and sediment would drop out. That's part of the reason that these lands are rich for agriculture, is because of that history of that happening. So this is what happens when we restore floodplain. This is a project where we built the bottom of the creek back up to where it had been historically and breached the sides so that it could flood out. And then this is time-lapse video of what happens after, during and after a storm. It's coming, the water's coming down the creek, and then it reconnects with its floodplain. And then it recedes. And take a look at how much sediment it deposited from that storm event. I'm going to do that again so you can see. Look right here and watch what happens after the floods recede. So that sediment that gets deposited on a floodplain is not going downstream. It's not staying under the road. It's not filling in Pescadero Marsh. Oh, now we can see other things that we can look at. Then, just to state a truism, fish need water, and farms need water, and people need water. So when you've got an area like this that has no snowpack, and it doesn't have an intertie to a state water project, and it doesn't have an irrigation district, and it doesn't have a water utility, what do you do so that fish farms and people can share this limited supply? One of the things that we do is we assess farms for efficiency of their water systems and help them implement the most effective, and help them implement effective irrigation systems. Another thing to do, you can see up here, this is while it's under construction. This incidentally is not in the Pescadero Watershed, although we have done this in the Pescadero Watershed. The other thing we can do is help farmers build reservoirs or ponds out of the stream, not dams in the stream, and be able to irrigate from the creek, which is right here, or excuse me, be able to divert from the creek into this reservoir, and then do that when the creek is high, when there's enough water for the fish in the farm, which typically is in the winter when it's raining and you don't need to irrigate. You would put it in this pond and then irrigate from this pond when it's dry and irrigation is needed. Then the farmer is not taking from the creek when the creek is already very low. So that's it in a nutshell. It sounds simple. Turns out that these things are difficult to do. Sometimes it can require 7 to 9 different local, state, or federal permits to accomplish conservation projects, and that could be an entire webinar in and of itself. So another thing that we do is try to remove barriers to migration throughout the watershed. I thought this would be a fun video to show. This is another time-lapse video because this is a project we did with our partners in county parks to remove the old Works Project era dam that was in there that had formed a swimming hole. And for those of you who are local and want to start burning up well, there isn't a chat box, but the Q&A about why we got rid of the swimming hole, it was already not functioning, and County Parks was already not going to be filling it back up again. But I'm happy to say that since we removed the dam and there's been more natural function in that system, there's natural swimming holes in the creek, so go find them. So this was the old dam. It was a flashboard dam. So there would be wood put across this. And what we did is went in and first we had to dewater the creek, which is basically put a dam above and below and then funnel the whole creek through that culvert, that pipe right there. And then they worked to cut the dam out, build a notch, put in some substrate, oops. I'm going to move it along a little bit. And that's what it looked like right afterwards. So this is the before and the after, immediately after, and now this site looks radically different. It's got habitat features, a lot of complexity in it. It's got pools and riffles, etc. I've also talked a lot about carbon farming, basically, without using so many words. And so that idea is to help farms and ranches be resilient to climate change, be productive and able to thrive, operate within their business model, recognize how their operations work, and also enable farms and ranches to be part of the solution to climate change. So we work with a number of people, property by property, to develop very site-specific plans for managing their agricultural operations in ways that are restorative and work with nature and pull greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and store them in healthy soils and vegetation. From the 11 plans that we've completed for San Mateo County, when implemented, they will sequester or store, pull down and store 1,400 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually. That's equal to the amount that is sequestered by over 1,800 acres of US forests per year. It's also the equivalent of taking 302 cars off the road, or 3.5 million miles not driven, or the energy use of 162 homes per year. All of that from building soil health, managing vegetation, and working in a way that works with the land while still being a productive business that produces essential food and provides jobs. This is doable. And when you think about the fact that this is what we're doing in San Mateo County, and there's 100 conservation districts around the state and many more around the nation and others doing this as well, the potential for agriculture to be a significant part of the climate solution is astonishing. I just want to flag, I've talked a lot about sediment and water and fish and forests, but that sustainable solutions to watershed management need to acknowledge that there are people here. People live here, they make their living here. They depend on businesses that depend on these lands. People travel here to hike, bike, and camp. And balancing competing demands on limited resources particularly depends on people coming together and working across interests, across their values, across languages, across political divides, to enhance, restore, and share what everyone loves and needs from these watersheds. And I believe that a watershed truly is the connective tissue that is what we all have in common for all of us who depend on it. So I find that often when we talk about restoration or we talk about managing natural resources, we don't always talk about the people who show up in different ways. It's not just the people who do the restoration, but the people who live on and use these lands and are really the stewards of these lands every single day in ways large and small. So what does this all look like when you put it together? Property by property, this is what it looks like at scale to build resilience to climate change, to reduce flooding, to reduce the risk of fire, to reduce erosion, etc. And so I'm gonna stop this share for a second and start a different one. Let's see if I can. There we go. And I'm going to give you a sneak peek of something. It's not fully baked yet, so bear with me. But this is something that we're going to be putting online for all of you and anyone else who wants to come see. This is, since we haven't been able to do tours in the watershed, we're doing tours on Google Earth. And this is just some of the projects that have been going on in this watershed. If it looks messy to you, good. That means there's a lot going on. So starting at the top, with Portola Redwoods, Portola State Park. We're doing a lot with state parks on in-stream habitat restoration and also managing and conserving their water for their campgrounds. Other barriers to fish passage to be removed in the watershed. I'm going to show you shortly where we released 10,000 juvenile coho salmon. I'm going to show you that video. It's super exciting to me. Let's visit Old Hall Road. So Old Hall Road is also in a county park where we just did a major project to manage access and egress. And oh, Sid, I can't post the link to it because it's not online yet, but we will include it when we send it out to folks. So let's see. So let me close this and go to, let's go visit Lomamar. So the folks at Lomamar, have a, let's see, it's not, well, let me see if I zoom in a little bit. Oh, there it is, but no, that's not it either. Well, working with a Mutual Water Company, a group of folks in Lomamar to get them to improve their tanks and their water storage and how they manage the resources on the creek. And you can see how all of this is connected as you keep going down the watershed. All these blue pins are water conservation and water storage projects, like this one at Harley Farms Goat Dairy. This pin is actually not location specific. This is one pin just for all carbon farming in the watershed. That floodplain project that I showed you is right here. The dredge project is right here. And some of these red pins are showing where there's forest health and fuel load reduction projects. Like, I know there's some folks on this I saw who are from this neighborhood right here, back in the canyon of Buteno Canyon. You all know about the chipper program to help enable and empower property owners to manage their fuel load. So I'm going to stop that share and go back now to the the PowerPoint. Hang on a second. Is it showing? No. Fortunately, I've got some folks right here who can tell me what they can see. So there we go. So I love this video. I'm just going to play this whole video and show you what happens when we build it, they will come. So if you do this kind of restoration top to bottom in a watershed, you get this kind of prize at the end. And this was a lifetime high for me. Today is amazing. To see the moment that they leave the bucket and swim off and become wild creatures. I hope that this helps people feel that they're part of something wonderful and great that goes beyond their built human environment. Often when people talk about salmon, they talk about the ancestry of salmon, the tradition, the heritage of how it used to be. And what we're doing today is restoring that heritage so that decades, hundreds of years from now, hopefully, the fish that come back into this watershed will be the descendants of the fish that were put in here today.
Coho are a symbol of healthy functioning ecosystems. we have been looking for opportunities to supplement populations where they historically existed. Pescadero is one of those places. We just feel like enough has happened. We feel good about the trajectory of this watershed. We think it can support salmonids. So here we are, reintroducing fish.
The reason that fish can survive here is because public and private landowners, farmers and ranchers, environmental advocates, agency staff, all have contributed something at a landscape scale, at a watershed scale, to make it possible for these fish to thrive today. Everyone has a role to play, everybody. There's plenty more to do. So that to me is the big prize at the end, is seeing when it works, when you've made the conditions so that wildlife can come back and thrive with people there. So take a screenshot or take a picture with your phone or something of this if you'd like to check out our website, where you can sign up for our newsletter or to be notified about board meetings, check out our Facebook page, our Instagram, or our YouTube channel, which is what all these different time-lapse videos that we do for projects, we'll put them there. They're kind of scrappy. They're typically with like my phone or somebody else's, but check them out. And then I'm going to shift to Q&A, but before I do, I want to ask you to go back to that poll and tell me one word that describes what you're taking away from this time together. What are you feeling or thinking or experiencing or planning now? One thing that you're thinking of right now. Inspiration, great. Community, I agree. Thank you. A lot of inspiration, that's great. Oh, somebody's gobsmacked. I like that. And I'm glad someone's feeling pride. Whoever's feeling pride, and I bet you're feeling pride in your watershed. A lot of inspiration too. I'm so glad to see that. That's great. A lot of pride, a lot of inspiration, a lot of hope, joy, community. It's good sometimes to have good news, isn't it? To know that there's something we can do. All right, well then I am going to stop my screen share here. Love hearing this from you all, and thank you. And we can go ahead and go to the Q&A. I'm going to, let's see. Oh, there's some comments here too about people's comments, people who weren't able to get onto the word cloud. Hope for the future, hope, connections. Sid, you snuck in 4 words, but we'll let it go. Any other, oh, there we go. Any other questions?
It looks like Peter has his hand raised. I'll unmute you now, Peter. Maybe not, never mind.
Okay, let's see. Are there any plans for reintroducing elk into the rangelands, coastal grasslands of San Mateo County? That's a question from Michael McGill. The RCD doesn't currently have any plans for that, but I have definitely heard some conversations. I know there are some folks who are really interested in having that conversation, and we've offered to help facilitate the conversation. Brianne says, what was one major challenge that you had to overcome when implementing one of these projects? Brianne, I would say that the single greatest barrier for me to protecting natural resources is the unintended consequences of the regulations that are meant to protect natural resources. And it's because of that that I spent much of last year assisting the California Landscape Stewardship Network and the Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, with an initiative called Cutting Green Tape that tries to identify ways to remove some of the barriers to restoration when basically a lot of the regulatory protections that are in place are really good for stopping bad actions, but they're a big net, and they unintentionally also kind of catch good actions and can make it a lot harder to get right fitting regulatory compliance for restoration. Is there another one here? Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions? Oh, there's two more just came in. David asks, a lot of the great work you're doing must be expensive. Why, yes, it is. Where do you get your funding for this work? First of all, I just want to say for people to change their mind about how they live and work and play doesn't cost anything. So I just want to throw that out there. But these restoration projects are really very expensive. Probably about 80% of our funding comes from state bond funds, a lot from federal grants as well. The RCD functions like a nonprofit. Our property tax base, the revenues that we receive, are less than $70,000 a year for all the work that we do, and we have over 20 staff. We actually don't receive enough in funding to exist, to comply with the laws to be a government agency. So we're very dependent on grant funds. And then we basically pass those through and bring them to the folks whose lands these are. Monica's question is, when am I moving to Pescadero? Well, Monica, let's talk. Let's see. Shandon, do you ever do restoration that doesn't involve heavy equipment? Yes, and I'm glad you asked that. In fact, that's really what a lot of the conservation and carbon farm plans are about. There's a lot that we do with hedgerows, building soil health, cover crops. Doing irrigation efficiency isn't really heavy equipment at all. There's so much that we do all the time, and a lot of what we do is technical assistance, private confidential technical assistance to people, which is talking about how to change their operations or the way they think about or approach a land, which involves no equipment at all. So thank you for asking that. Sid asks, have you ever monitored San Vicente Creek into the Marine Reserve? Yes, Sid, and we are going to, at the March 24th meeting of the Mid-Coast Community Council, we're going to be talking about some of the water quality monitoring we do of that creek and others. And also coming up soon, maybe I can include it in the follow-up to this webinar. We have a webinar that the RCD is hosting that's basically everything we know from the water quality monitoring that's been done in the Mid-Coast area, basically Half Moon Bay to Pacifica. Next question, Michael McGill, are there any current assessments of lamprey in Pescadero Creek? Any initiatives that target lamprey in the watershed, and you've seen carcasses of adults? No, we haven't done restoration. I don't know of anybody who's done restoration for lamprey, but they're cool. And we've seen a lot of them. And when we do these projects, when we do these projects, we have to be very careful not to do more harm than good, right? That's what those regulations are for. And so one of the things we have to do is relocate critters out of the way, and lamprey and the baby lamprey, the amocetes, are among them. We do have some video that I think is on our YouTube page, and I'll make sure it gets up there, of mating lamprey in Pescadero Creek. And we were really excited to see that because they're often a sign of watershed health and good water quality. Got it, Neil. We should include water quality monitoring in San Gregorio, but I thought your group had that covered, so we could talk more. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, so not fair, the people who are texting me the questions. Oh wait, no, it's an answer. Okay, Joe Issel on our staff just texted me to make sure I get this right. Basically, all coho work is good for lamprey. And he's our fish guy, and he knows more than I do. So thank you, Joe. Beavers, that's right, thanks. So we haven't tackled the beaver issue, Michael. I think we have some conversations about it. It's really interesting, and I'd like to talk more about it. We definitely are really interested in a lot of the beaver dam analogs that that are functional equivalents, but don't have the biodiversity component that beavers have. We definitely know that there were beavers in this area somewhat recently. I remember, I think it was maybe 7-8 years ago, finding freshly chewed sticks from beaver in Pescadero Marsh. I know that a number of people had concerns about it causing unpredictable flooding. So it's a conversation we haven't fully had yet. Any chance that the chipper program will start before mid-May? That's a question from Sid. Let's see, is Sheena on here? No, she's not. Joe, I don't know if you can text me the answer to that either, but I know it's starting around May, but it takes a while, Sid, to get it lined up. There's a lot that has to be in place before you do it. And typically you don't want to do it when there's still risk of storms, because then you have to cancel and reschedule, and it can be difficult. Any river otters in the watershed? Those of you who are in the watershed, speak up. Have you seen river otters? I've never seen one there. Joe is saying likely yes. Oh wait, Joe, I don't know if that was to the chipper program or to the river otters. Again, next time we're gonna do this in real life. Okay, Monica says not here. I've never seen them. And we are coming to a close. It's been a pretty fast hour, but I've really enjoyed this opportunity to share this with you all, and I thank you for coming.
Yes, I want to thank Kellyx. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I definitely felt inspired by all the work that the San Mateo Resource Conservation District is doing, and so much work that's supporting our communities and our local habitats and resources. I also was there for the release of the coho in the creek in Memorial Park, and I could tell it was a really special day for you and your crew. So I was really happy to be there for that. We are partnering with the San Mateo Resource Conservation District for a couple of upcoming projects for our forest health grant projects in Huddart and Wonder Lake County parks. And we're going to have a webinar in 3 weeks. It'll be April 8th at 7 p.m. Our natural resource manager, Hannah Ormshaw, will be doing a presentation all about the work in those parks that'll be coming up this summer. So if you want to join us for that presentation, I will be sending an email out with a link for that registration. We can send out the link for the next webinar that you were just discussing in that email, and also a link to this recording if you want to watch it again or want to pass it on to somebody who couldn't watch it tonight. So thank you so much, Kellyx. Did you have anything else?
I'm so sorry, I did. I wanted to say that while I'm the one that's been speaking here, there were a number of people on RCD staff who pulled this presentation together. And so their faces aren't on the screen, but Jared Fisher and Brianna Whitney and a number of staff and the folks who do these projects every day and are all the boots on the ground meeting with all the property owners. I just want to give a big shout out to RCD staff for the extraordinary work that they do and the way that they inspire me every day. And also big thanks to all of the partners. I was talking about work that's being done by a lot of different entities, and many of you are in this webinar, and just want to say thank you. And thanks to our great partnership with county parks.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kellyx. And we'll be sending out an follow-up email to you all in the next couple of days. So stay tuned for that. And thank you for this webinar. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.